welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Madeline Martin is a New York Times, USA Today, Publishers Weekly, and internationally best-selling author of historical fiction and historical romance, with books that have been translated into over 25 different languages. Her latest novel, The Booklover's Library, is out now. Madeline lives in Florida with her 2 daughters, 2 incredibly spoiled cats, and a man so wonderful he's been dubbed Mr. Awesome. She's a die-hard history lover who will happily lose herself in research any day. And she also loves to travel, attributing her fascination with history to having spent most of her childhood as an army brat in Germany. Madeline Martin, thank you so much for joining today, and congratulations on your latest novel, The Booklover's Library. Author Kristen Harmel says a spectacularly well-researched and well-plotted tale of World War II, motherhood, and the solace we find in books. The Booklover's Library is filled with characters you'll root for, drama that will bring you to tears, and the kind of emotional journey that will earn this novel a permanent place in your own Booklover's Library. Author Kate Quinn says, The Booklover's Library is a quiet little jewel of a wartime novel, focusing not on the vast strokes of politics or battle, but on the struggles of the home front and the heart. Madeline Martin always delivers. Author Chanel Cleaton says The Booklover's Library is a beautiful homage to the bonds forged by a love of books and a testament to the power of reading. And author Brianna Labuski says, Martin's meticulous research transports readers to bomb-ridden England and opens a door to a fascinating slice of library history that I'd never read about before. Through it all, I cried, I sighed with joy, and I rooted for all the complex and endearing characters. This love letter to literature, motherhood, and community should be at the top of any bibliophile's must-read list. So with that, what can you tell us about The Booklover's Library? How would you describe it?
So it definitely is a heartwarming home front read. It really is about just as the beginning of war is about to happen. Our protagonist Emma, she's a widow and she has a daughter, and she has to send her away. She's a single mom, and you know, this has been something that, like, the evacuation of children during World War II is something very near. Like, and it's I can't even imagine, honestly, as a parent having to send your child away for an undisclosed amount of time to an unknown location to live with people that you know nothing about. And actually, some of these kids ended up being gone for 6 years. So,
Wow.
I mean, yeah. So that I knew I always wanted to write about that story. And then I'm a history nerd, so I was kind of reading through a bunch of articles at one point, and I happened to stumble upon this place called the Booklover's Library. And it was a real place that existed. It was a lending library that was set up inside of a Boots chemist, which would basically, imagine if you would, like, a Walgreens or a CVS, if you went into the very back of it or onto a second floor, all of a sudden you're in a library. And it's these these thick pile carpets and fresh cut flowers and stained glass windows and just shelves of beautiful books. And it was like walking into a completely different world. And that was absolutely by design. And that's what the Booklover's Libraries were all about. And apparently, well, this took place during the marriage bar. And so when women got married, they had to give up their jobs so that they could become wives and mothers. And apparently, the women who worked as librarians for the Booklover's Library loved their jobs so much that they apparently had a statistically higher engagement than anybody else in other areas of employment because they didn't want to give up their jobs. And
Wow.
I thought, you know, This is a really wonderful location to set because I knew it would be a little bit difficult to write a story, a very heavy story about a mother having to send her daughter away. And I thought,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, this is going to be a really lovely, light location to add some levity, to add some comfort with books. And then, especially when I started researching the Book Lovers Library and reading about these real life quirky characters that inspired the characters that were in the real book, that were in my
Mhm.
book, I thought, oh my gosh, this is just going to be so fun. So that's sort of how I came up with the idea for the Book Lovers Library.
Something that really struck me as I was reading and watching Emma, our protagonist, take on her new job at this book lovers library was the meticulous training. The employees who work in this shop were taking extensive classes on publishing and literature as part of their training to work there. And quite frankly, it made me jealous. Um, is that really how it was?
Yeah, actually, including the titles of the classes that she was taking were titles that I actually found in historical documents that these librarians had to actually do. So they were a very specialized job that they did, where they were curating lists of books for readers to read because you had your Class A subscribers and your Class B subscribers, and you paid
Mhm.
more for Class A, which of course meant that you expected the entire world to lay out your feet. So your librarians had to be able to cater to that specific clientele. And the Book Lovers Library really was meant for like upper middle class. And so it was kind of like a to-do, you know. And
Mhm.
so they wanted their librarians to know exactly what they were doing. They didn't want to have any slip-ups. And you know, it's interesting because sort of like and nowadays when you get a book into Costco, it's a big deal. It's like, oh my gosh, my book made it into Costco. And it's funny because back in that day when your book made it into Boots Book Lovers Library, it was a big deal. And so they would know all the latest books that were coming out. They would be able to somebody could come in and say, "Oh, I'm feeling, you know, for all of our mood readers out there, oh,
Mhm.
I'm feeling like a book like this." And they would say, "I have the exact perfect story for you." And they would grab it off the shelves and give it to you. And that is what the Boots Book Lovers Library provided to its patrons.
How long did it last? Because,
Um,
you know, I when I go into a Boots in England these days, I haven't seen a book lover's library in there.
Sadly, no. Yeah, it was around the 70s, I think, that it ended up
Wow.
stopping. Yeah, but it lasted from the early 1900s until around that time. So, yeah.
You're known for, among other things, your meticulous research. How do you generally conduct your research? And was there anything different about the way that you approached research for the Book Lovers Library?
I read a lot of nonfiction books. So I didn't keep track of it with this particular book, but because I already had a bunch of the books on my bookshelf. But with my last book, which was The Keeper of Hidden Books, that one was set in Warsaw, Poland, and was based off of like these journals found by Warsaw's public librarians. For that one, I used over 100 nonfiction books. So this will give you an idea of how many when I say I use a lot of books, I use a lot of books. And I just pour through these nonfiction books because I get these really great firsthand accounts. I also like to visit on site. I mean, one does what they must, right?
Mhm,
So
yeah.
I will go on site and do research there. And I've been very fortunate to find some incredible tour guides that are able to show me around all the areas that I need to know. So I did get to go to Nottingham, which was a really incredible experience. It was a really crazy experience because it was still snowing in March, and this Florida girl was like, "What is going on?" I was not expecting this, but I did. I get to go underneath the city. They have these incredible caves that people had used during World War II, during like the Blitz, to be able to hide in and take shelter. So I did get to go down and do like a tour of all the underground caves. I got to see the original Boots that actually was there at that time, but unfortunately, it's a Zara now, and so
Oh,
the inside definitely doesn't match the beautiful exterior. Inside, it's all there's glossy white walls and halogen lights, and there's like no personality left inside of it. But the outside is still exquisite. So this
which
one, I oh, go ahead.
oh, no, please go right ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so this one, I mean, I approached my research for this one very similar in the way that I've approached my previous books.
What draws you to writing historical fiction?
Oh, I'm just a history nerd. I spent about 12 years in Germany total growing up when I was a little girl, and I'm an army brat. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we went to so many amazing historical sites. And at these historical sites, you have these tour guides, and tour guides who work at historical sites are generally very impassioned about what
Mhm.
they're telling you. And so I think I grew up just hearing these wonderful stories about all these incredibly cool old things in Europe. And I've always been a super imaginative person. And as a little girl, I kind of lived in my own head. And I'm sure that my imagination just took flight from all of those stories that I grew up listening to and all those cool old places. And this is the byproduct.
Lucky for all of us.
Well, thank you.
uh, One thing that I was shocked to learn about when reading this book, and I learned a lot, was about this marriage bar in England, which I think you mentioned earlier meant that when women married, they were barred from working and forced to give up their jobs in order to focus on husbands and children. And perhaps even more shocking was that the employment ban extended to widows who had children. How can you talk about that a little bit more? And how did you first learn about this?
Yeah, so I was actually doing research for Boots, and it mentioned,
Hmm.
oh, and Boots started to hire widows from military members, like war widows.
Mhm.
And I thought, okay, like why is that like a big deal? Like, wouldn't
Mhm.
they just hire them anyways? And then I started doing the research, and I realized that widows were basically treated per the marriage bar the same widows who had children. Let me specify that because
Mhm.
widows that didn't have children were able to be hired just like anybody else. But if you were a widow and you had children, they looked at your obligation in life as being a mother, not being an employee. And now this did extend more to sort of more desirable jobs that were more considered more elevated. So, you know,
Mhm.
secretaries and librarians and that kind of thing. If you were wanting to work in a factory, you could go, they wouldn't care as long as you figured out what you were doing with your kid during the day. So that was, it was really, very interesting because like with Emma, she was very lucky that her husband had paid into a pension. And so
Mhm.
she received a widow's pension and her daughter received a pension for her. But as far as if a woman didn't have that, essentially she was just expected to either go and live with family or she was expected to just get married again. And if she couldn't get married or she couldn't live with family, she was basically reliant on any kind of handouts that the government was willing to give her. And unfortunately, a lot of these women fell into abject poverty. So it was a really horrible and sad situation for women. Not everyone was as lucky as Emma.
And so was Boots in this book lovers library really sort of a trailblazer in that way of
They were as far as
hiring?
war widows go.
Mhm.
I read that and I thought, oh, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have? Because I was a single mother for
Mhm.
several years, and so I really wanted to kind of elevate the impact of sending a child away by making her a single parent because you
Mhm.
don't have a rock of support at home to go home and cry to. You basically are bearing that burden entirely on your own. And I thought, okay, well, this will really up the stakes if I make her a widow. And then I thought, especially if she starts working here, and maybe I make it where she's helping to sort of pave the way for these war widows. Which I mean, Emma is a fictional character, and this particular incident is fictional. But them hiring war widows absolutely was really something that they did. So this was me just kind of adding my own little flavor on as to why.
The novel is about the power of books. It's about family in its many forms. It's also about motherhood. And as you said, in particular, single motherhood and the challenges and stigmas that follow single mothers to this day. So, can you talk a little bit more about what drew you to writing about single motherhood in particular?
Yeah. Single motherhood is something that has very hugely impacted my life just because of the years that I was a single mom. Not only the difficulties of it, because of course, obviously, it's difficult, right?
Yeah.
Being a
Yeah.
mother and a father and pretty much everything that your kids need. But also, unfortunately, the judgment, which is really crazy that this day and age there would even be that judgment. I think I read once that like 40% of marriages end in divorce. That's a lot of single parents out there.
Yeah.
And oftentimes dad are seen as single dad heroes and women are seen in a less favorable light. We'll just say that.
Mhm.
um, and I definitely experienced a significant amount of judgment. And to me, it was shocking because I hadn't been a single mother. I went through a divorce, and the judgment that I received, even sometimes from friends, was pretty shocking.
Wow.
And so I thought, my gosh, what would they have gone through in the 40s if here we are in the 21st century facing this? And so, but also, even outside of those difficulties is the beauty of being a single parent as well, because
Mhm.
you are the sole recipient of all that love and affection. You get all of those smiles, all of those hugs, all of those sticky hands and kisses and everything that goes with it. And that part of it, I feel like it just makes this bond that is so completely beautiful. And so I really wanted to showcase that between Emma and Olivia's relationship.
Mhm. Speaking of that strong bond, there's a scene, it's near the beginning, we've talked about it, so no spoilers, but where Emma has to put Olivia on a bus to evacuate her from the city and hopefully keep her out of harm's way, as England is joining the war. And it's so heartbreaking. I was crying reading it,
Oh.
and I wondered what it was like for you to write that scene. Did you have a hard time writing it?
It was really hard to write. So I based Olivia off of both of my daughters. They're
Oh,
teenagers
wow.
now, but I went back and I looked at pictures of them when they were 7. And it's funny because you think, oh, I'll never forget how they were at this age. And I'm glad that cell phones have dates on them because I was
Yeah.
able to go back exactly to those pictures. And as soon as I saw all of those pictures, it's like when you smell something familiar and it brings back that entire memory. Looking at
Mhm.
those pictures brought back those entire memories of my girls. And so I made Olivia sort of this blend between both of my sweet girls when they were between the ages of 7 and 9. And so a lot of kind of the things that they said and did were really modeled after my own girls. And so it was an incredibly emotional scene to write. I mean, when she puts her daughter on the bus the first time, and I have this part where, the daughter is trying so hard to not cry, and she's trying so hard to be brave. And then her face just breaks and she just starts crying. I cried so hard. I'm getting a little choked up even talking
Yeah.
about it. Crying about the entire time I was writing that scene. I was just in absolute tears because there were so many times that my girls had done that where they tried so hard to be brave, and
Yeah.
it was just too much for their little selves, and just ended up breaking. And so it was very emotional writing some of those scenes, and it also just connected me so much more to Olivia's character because she's mine.
Yes. Yeah. How do your characters normally come to you? I know you said Olivia is a composite of your girls, and I think you mentioned earlier that a lot of the characters in this novel in particular were based off of maybe people that you were reading about in your research. How does that normally work?
So I actually really do base a lot of my fictional characters off of firsthand accounts. And that's all gleaned really through all of those nonfiction books that I had specified that I read through earlier.
Mhm.
And so it's not really based off of any one person per se. It's almost an amalgamation of all of these different firsthand accounts that I've read through. And I just kind of take certain little bits and pieces of each person and I blend them into that's what this person is going to be. And I'm very, very detailed when it comes to my characters. If they have more than a couple of lines in the book, chances are they have a whole story that's not even written into the book. I have all of their backstory, I have all of their hopes and dreams and fears, I have their whole character arc. I really, really put a lot of work into the minor characters just as much as I do into the major characters.
So what does your process look like then? When you first start out with the spark of an idea for a book, when you read that article, that gets you going and thinking this would make a great book. What what happens next? What does that look like?
Well, first of all, I have to do just enough research to put together a proposal to send to my publisher and be like, yes. Because that is number one. I would love to say that I would just write a book for the sake of enjoyment, but I have bills to pay as well.
Yep.
It is my job, so I can't work for free, sadly. So and then once they say yes, my mail people hate me because then I go on and I spend way too much money buying a ton of nonfiction books, everything that I can possibly get my hands on. And we have one of those postal mail boxes. It's like in the center of the neighborhood.
Mhm.
When I order all of those books, they give up and they park in front of my house and they actually bring up a couple boxes of all the books that start coming in. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm working on a new book. So then I really start the discovery aspect of that book, and I really sit down and I start just pouring through all of those books. Which, for me, in addition to being a history nerd, I'm also a research nerd. So this is like my thing. Like I love this so much. So I will just get a notepad and a pen and just start taking handwritten notes. And again, for whatever reason, I just kind of kept track when I did the Keeper of Hidden Books, and I had, for that book alone, over 15 spiral bound notebooks that were completely filled with handwritten notes. And
Wow.
it's funny because somebody had asked me in an interview how many of those make it into the book, and I realized I think maybe 30%. But the rest of that 70% is what makes it come to life for me. So
Wow.
once I put all of that research in and I really feel very comfortable with it, that's when I start planning a trip. So that's usually about 3 months of solid research. And then I start planning a trip within the next 3 months or so. And then that's when I start reaching out. And, I reach out to tour guides and say, I need all of this information. And I've had some people come back and say, you know more about my country during World War II than I do. You might need somebody else. And then other people are like, I don't know all of that, but I know most of it. And the things I don't know, I can figure out. And I'm like, perfect. So then I go with them. But so then I get to this point where I realize, oh my gosh, my book is due in 2 months. And that's when I go into frantic mode as far as, I guess at this point I've been slowly but surely building the characters. If you'd almost think about them as clay, whenever I get any little bits and pieces of information, it's like a little wad of clay that kind of gets added on and builds up these characters. And so then I have a really, really detailed outline that I put together that is essentially really being put together through the course of all of my research. Because, with history, I mean, I feel like my timeline's already laid out. It's kind of cheating, right?
Mhm.
And I very much do try to stick with historical accuracy as much as absolutely possible. And so, or I mean, as much as any person can do that didn't live in that particular time period.
Right.
And so I put together the outline and then I write it in 2 months.
So when you're in that writing part of it, are you in front of your computer all day, every day, or what does that part look like?
I usually break it down for how many words I want this particular book to be. So for
Mhm.
authors, we usually judge things based off of word count rather than page count because font type and size can throw so much off. And so I'll have a certain word count in my head that I want to hit. And I know that I have to hit so many words per day with that. And I will say it definitely is, it's definitely sitting a lot more in front of the computer and just typing, typing, typing for hours on end. But for me, if you've seen The Princess Bride, because I've
Mhm.
done so much research, when the grandfather is reading the story to the grandson and it like starts playing the movie, and then if he interrupts, it's like everybody kind of just freezes where they are, and then he
Mhm.
resumes, and then they resume as well. That's exactly how it's like when I'm writing. Aside from the fact that, like, instead of being watching a movie, I'm in the movie. I'm tasting everything. I'm smelling everything. I'm feeling everything. I am basically that character. And so at this point, it's almost easy. I won't say too easy because it's usually so frantic.
Mm.
This 2 months of writing because I have been so completely immersed in the story that it's just completely alive inside of me.
Wow. And so you're just sort of living it and trying to get it all down,
Yes,
basically.
absolutely. Yes.
What draws you to writing books about books?
So, it's funny because I like to say that I've always been a reader, but apparently my mom told me that they used to have to pay me a penny a page when I was little, but
Really?
I don't remember, so it doesn't count. And so I have just always really loved books, and I feel like books have always been such a huge part of my life. Sort of kind of going back to having been an army brat, for me, librarians were some of my best friends when I would go to these new schools because I was painfully shy as a little girl,
Mm.
and they would help me find books to read. And through these characters, I didn't feel so alone. I didn't feel so awkward, like I was the only person that I've ever gone through not having friends and having to start over again, because these characters were too. And
Mm.
even with so I try to incorporate some of these books into my stories as well. For example, Anne of Green Gables and the Book Lovers Library. For me, Anne Shirley was very much that sort of awkward little girl, and I was very much an awkward little girl. And because I love to read so much, I had an extensive vocabulary, which just made me more awkward. And so with Anne Shirley, I found a friend. And with so many of these characters, I found friends. And for me, it just has been such a poignant part of my life, not only as a little girl, but all the way through my life. And even now, obviously, I'm a writer, so it's a huge part of my life. But so it just makes sense for me to have my readers, or I'm sorry, my characters be readers, and really get to enjoy writing as well, and books and everything.
How did you come to writing?
Oh my gosh. So I was on maternity leave with my oldest, and I was reading Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series, and I thought, oh, this sounds really interesting. I maybe I can write a book. And so I actually started writing romance before I started to write historical fiction, which is how I can write a book in 2 months. I've gotten really good at writing fast. So I wrote about 35 historical romances before I started writing historical fiction. And
Wow.
yeah. Yeah, it's been a lot. So, and at the time, I was actually working full time as a business analyst. And I joke that I was also writing full time because for several years I was writing about 6 to 8 romances a year. And I was also momming
Wow.
full time because my kids were in everything. And then for a couple of those years, I was a single mom as well. And so I got laid off. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall. And I told my
Mhm.
husband, if I do get laid off, can I just try writing full time because I'm tired?
Mhm.
And he said, absolutely. So it's horrible to say it, but I was really excited when I got laid off because I thought, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to have the entire house to myself. I can just focus on my work. Nobody's going to be here. That was February 2020. The
Mm.
pandemic happened 3 weeks later, and
Oh
I
my
got
gosh.
robbed. Everybody was home. Nobody ever left. And so, but that was when I wrote The Last Bookshop in London, which was my first historical fiction. And I am so immensely lucky that that ended up hitting number 8 on the New York Times.
Mm.
And that book was just so incredibly well received. And that has completely launched my life into the ability to write full time, which is something that I am grateful for every single day. Because I mean, I've been writing full time now for 4 years, but it took 15 years of blood, sweat, tears, and feeling like I was working 3 jobs at the same time and getting 4 hours of sleep a night for over a decade. And it's an amazing thing, and I'm so beyond grateful.
What was your first published book? Because you wrote all the historical romances
Correct.
before
It was
that,
called
right?
Deception of a Highlander.
Okay.
Yes.
And what was the road to publication like for that very first one? How
Well,
did you
so
get
that
it
one
published?
ended up, yeah, it ended up being a 3 book deal. So,
Okay.
and I went with a small press on that one. And that's the thing,
Mhm.
like, it's funny because I've done a small press, and then I was writing for Harlequin Historical, and I did self-pub with some of my romance. And then now I'm writing with Hanover Square Press under Harlequin, which is under HarperCollins. So I've been the I've
Wow.
independent published, I've done small press published, and I've done traditional published. So I have like really done the gamut.
And so for the first one, your first one was small press.
Yes.
And then you did some independent
Right,
publishing. Your
right.
first large press book, did you have an agent this whole time? Or
Yes. Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Mhm.
And then just trying it all out and seeing what feels good and what works best. Which did you enjoy, which publishing experience have you enjoyed the most?
Definitely traditionally published personally. I know that a lot of people like independent publishing because they have the freedom, but it's nice having the additional support, especially when it comes to the marketing, because it is so overwhelming. And knowing that they have a specialized team that is there to help you with that is very helpful. And I've been incredibly lucky as well. The traditionally published route that I've taken, I mean, I have such beautiful covers. I mean, I feel
Oh
like
yeah.
whenever I give direction on covers, they really listen, and I'm so proud of every single one of the covers that I have, and I think that that's one of the things that people talk about. Oh, I get to choose my own covers, and I'm like, oh, but I've got gorgeous ones.
Yes. Yeah.
So I've been very very happy. Hmm.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before you started publishing?
I wish that I would have had the confidence when I was in the very beginning phases of writing that
Mhm.
I do now. Like I feel like now if I have an edit done on my book and one of my editors says, "Oh, this may not work." And in my head, I'm like, "Oh no, this works because of this, this, and this. And maybe I can add this to strengthen it or something."
Mhm.
Whereas in my earlier years, if they said, "Oh, this doesn't work," I'd say, "Oh, okay," and I would just take it out. And so I feel like having that confidence not only in my ability to craft a book, but also in my own voice and knowing my own voice. I feel like that is something that I wish would have had that in the very beginning of my career. That I felt confident standing up for what I felt was right in the book.
Yeah. What advice would you give to aspiring authors now
Um, I
that are
think it's
listening?
I think it's super important to learn as much as you can about the craft of writing and
Mhm.
to always keep learning. I'm actually getting ready to start my MFA this fall for creative writing, and so I'm actually really excited because when I went to college, I went to school for business administration and I minored in economics, political science, and accounting, and I was a business analyst for my day job, and I did SQL programming, and so now I get to go back to school and really do what it is that I'm passionate about. And in the years prior, I've been working one on one with book coaches to strengthen my craft. And I
Mm.
feel like it is so important to know that every book that you put out is the best that you can write to your ability at that point in time, but that the next book that comes out will be even better. And I think that's so important. And learning really is the foundation for all of that.
That's great. That's fantastic advice.
Thank you.
Traditional last question. When the Book Lovers Library is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my goodness. Gosh, that's a great question. I'm so bad because I don't really listen to a lot of like the same like pops like music, I guess. I probably would honestly with the Book Lovers Library, um, I would probably think something classical, like maybe um I don't know. I can't even think of which one. But I can imagine something very light and delicate.
Yes, yes, and I think it lends itself to a nice classical
Thank you.
piece.
Something very like Jane Austen-esque. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes,
Yes.
I know exactly what you mean. I can see it. And maybe I will see it when it's a movie or series.
That would be awesome. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Madeline Martin, thank you so much for joining today. It's been a real pleasure getting the chance to talk to you.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me on Literary Prospects. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.